Okay, guys. So moving from that metaphor of Desdemona being the kind of storehouse of Othello's value in his life as the fountain, he sort of pivots in a different direction here as he confronts reality, as his confrontation of reality changes. The fountain becomes a cistern, a kind of water tank, and the connotation there in that particular metaphor, Desdemona's movement from a fountain and the source of Othello's vitality and the um, kind of the sense of stability of his identity becomes this stagnant and foul water tank, a cistern. For foul toads to not engender it. And what I think here, the foul toads are obviously an additional metaphor for corruption and sexual promiscuity. You were talking about, other men sleeping with Desdemona and tainting her virtue and corrupting her. Not engendering here, to have sex and breed, to have sex and gender, to breed animals. We're talking here again about that quick degeneration from, fairly idealistic figurative language to a very quick inversion of the idealism of that figurative language to this very crude kind of sexual language that immediately shows us the transition between his hypothetical idealizations of suffering, his desire to bear suffering with stoicism, the transition from that into this conception of a reality that he really can't confront. He finds it almost impossible to confront the idea that this source of virtue and this source of value in his life has become this festering water tank with foul toads having sex and breeding, this bestial imagery that constantly characterizes the discussions about sexuality in this play, and a sense of paranoia about, versions of romantic engagement that are not idealized abstractions. He says, "Turn thy complexion there, patience, thou young and rose-lipped cherubim. Aye, there look, grim as hell." There is an ambiguity in these lines here that involves a kind of initial reading of him addressing a embodied concept, a personified abstraction, patience, in the same way that he has earlier on in this in this speech and elsewhere in the play embodied these abstract conceptions. Turn thy complexion there, patience. It's personifying that abstract quality in his personality that he has, that embodies his stoicism. His stoicism is embodied itself by an abstract construct, so it can, again, draw attention to the connections between that abstract view of reality and his stoicism. But here, earlier on in the passage, he asks for a drop of patience, and it shifts here from a drop to a full individual in this personification, and is externalized from him. So that movement from a drop of patience that is resident within him, that he embodies and that suggests his ability to control the fluctuations and fluidity of life. Here, he's rejected that water extended metaphor and personified this abstract quality so that it becomes external to himself, and implies partly that he has lost this quality and that he cannot use that stoicism to make sense of himself and to make sense of his life. He addresses patience as a young and rose-lipped cherubim, in these kind of idealistic terms again. I there look grim as hell. Now, here there is this self-referential quality here about this line. Turn thy complexion there, patience. There is this suggestion of, I think, referring to himself here, having this betrayal of his sense of anxiety and uncertainty that is derived ultimately from his racial identity. And I think the tension between this particular image, turn thy complexion there, patience, there's a self-referential quality about that I think, betrays the way in which his sense of control over his life has been partly formed by his need to resist the way in which he has been seen as a racial outsider. I there look grim as hell in that final line borrows this kind of wordplay that I think, again, develops that self-referential quality. Because I and, I, A, Y, and I, the letter I, are indistinguishable to a theatrical audience. So I there look grim as hell, I think, suggests that that line could easily be talking about himself, and that therefore this patience has been externalized from himself. It's a way of revealing, I think, that the separation between that stoic quality that he has based his identity on so far in the play and its separation from him at this point in the text. I hope my noble lord esteems me thus. Again, we've got this esteems me honest, this repeated language that almost at this point in time, from an audience position, seems almost tiresome. We know that this is going to trigger a sense of anger and frustration from Othello. One thing I did forget to mention, actually, is the line "foul toads" above echoes here. It echoes those anxieties that he expresses in Act 3, Scene 3, lines 2, 7, 4 to 7, where he says, "I had rather be a toad and live upon the vapour of a dungeon." And again, he's worried in those lines about Desdemona's infidelity and the violation of his controllable private life. If we go back to these lines, Desdemona's request to be seen as honest. I hope my noble lord esteems me honest. But that phrase, again, I think betrays that sense of this abstract value. It's asking, I hope my noble lord values me as honest, but it could also refer to Othello's evaluation of her honesty. I hope you evaluate me honestly, rather than I hope you value me and see me as honest. I hope you go about the process of evaluation of my soul accurately and honestly. But he reads it in the first way. Oh, I, of course, it's dismissive. As summer flies are in the shambles that quicken even with the blowing. So the summer flies we're talking about here are that kind of carrion flies in rotting meat. Because shambles are a slaughterhouse. Shambles is a slaughterhouse. Quickening can mean to breed as well, and blowing is the moment of birth. So he's saying here, oh yeah, you're as faithful as flies are on it from the slaughterhouse that are born even with a sense of erotic arousal. So here, what he seems to be evaluating is this sense of her honesty is, again, envisioned purely through the lens of sexuality. That you're only honest if you admit to this sort of parasitical type of procreation. I think this vision comes from a sense of disgust at the parasitical speed with which animals and insects both live and die. So there's this sort of sense of dramatic proliferation in this particular simile here. The simile that he uses, you are as summer flies in the shambles that quicken. Because this word also can mean aroused. It can also mean that you have been aroused even with blowing, even from birth. And that disgusting image is juxtaposed with this sense of longing. So this is where we see that real tension in his mind. That quickening even with blowing, that imagery of disgust that reveals his paranoia and anxiety about degradation and sexuality. That image obviously speaks to the corruption of purity and cleanliness. Oh, thou weed who art so lovely fair. That image itself is a kind of paradoxical metaphor. There's weeds we don't think of as possessing this quality of lovely fairness, and smells so sweet that the scent aches at thee. This paradoxical metaphor of Desdemona now as a weed that is both lovely and fair captures that sense of uneasy tension, that sense of his suspicion of her and his reluctance also to give up that idealization of her. She smells so sweet, and that sibilance there, I think, gives us a sense of the sinister quality of her beauty in his mind, and smells so sweet that the sense aches at thee. There's a real sense of whispering sinister intent in those lines. The sense aches at thee, again, is that kind of paradoxical suggestion of pain and pleasure, and it occurs here through his failed stoicism. The sense aches at thee, his impulsive desires ache because they come up against his stoic boundaries to the expression of his feeling. He does not allow his feelings and his inclinations any freedom to express themselves. And then he wishes on her the worst: wouldst thou ne'er been born? Desdemona, still unaware, alas, what ignorant sin have I committed? And then this is where we really get to the heart, I think, of Othello's idealism in his final lines. You see, his rhetorical question: was this fair paper? Again, that word repeated, fairness. And we can't help but notice that when he is idealizing and worshipping Desdemona, it means whiteness. It means, a racial identity that he has internalized as superior and more valuable than himself. Was this fair paper, this most goodly book, made to write whore upon? There's a suggestion here of we've shifted from a fountain, we've moved from a fountain now to a cistern, to a rotting, mouldy water tank, to diseased meat and the flies that embed within them, now to a Bible. The most goodly book is the Bible. And this is, again, another metaphor that he is using to make sense of Desdemona. Here, Desdemona equals the Bible, a suggestion of its abstract purity and the inability to reconcile ideals with corrupt reality. So this metaphor that he uses here to invoke the idealized vision of Desdemona, this fair white, notice, paper, it calls it this most goodly book. Was it made to be corrupted with this word, to write whore upon? This rhetorical question, using this metaphor of Desdemona as a Bible, reveals this clash between his idealistic vision of reality and the corruption of what is true and honest. What committed? Committed. This phrase here, you'll see in the etymological history of this word, committed, in the 14th century. It means to kind of connect with something, to commit, to do something together. So there is a sexual connotation of this. What committed? Committed, question mark, O thou public commoner. And that word as well borrows that same stem of commingling, of com. So there's this phrase here that means common whore, and it juxtaposes these two antithetical images that capture his conflicted mental state of a public commoner, of a degenerate public whore, and the most goodly book in its pure fairness. This language, these antithetical images, show us that failure to reconcile idealized conceptions of reality with the unpleasant truth. He then moves on to describe his emotional state at her sinfulness. I should make very forges of my cheeks that would to cinders burn up modesty, did I but speak thy deeds. This is an image, this is a metaphorical image, turning his face into burning forges, the places in which metal is welded and molded. His cheeks would be so hot with embarrassments that they would burn up any sense of residual modesty. Any modesty that she had left would be burnt by this embarrassment. Did I but reveal your deeds? Now, of course, there is a tragic irony of this that is almost kind of a taboo to even mention in our age, is that Othello's skin complexion suggests that this image itself, were it to be literal, would not even be possible to express. So there is a kind of a complication here. I should make very forges of my cheeks that would to cinders burn up modesty, did I but speak thy deeds, whereby he cannot express his attachment to these virtuous conceptions of chastity because of his race. He is literally precluded from expressing the embarrassment that a virtuous person would experience at this moment in time, because he's black and you wouldn't actually be able to see his skin blushing, which sounds ridiculous to say, but there is this sense then of these concepts not suiting him in some way, of him not even being able to borrow from them, which shows why he has to try so hard to envisage the world along these lines, because he knows his commitment to them will be questioned. What committed? Again, that word about the sense of combination or connection. The irony here is that this word means things coming together, and that actually the thing that we're seeing unfold here is the fragmentation of his self, fragmentation of Othello's identity from stoic, noble, Christian, virtuous warrior to impulsive, violent, erring barbarian. This final image carries out a kind of extended personification of the surroundings. It personifies the elements in response to the embarrassment that supposedly Desdemona has inflicted upon them all. Heaven stops the nose at it, and the moon winks. The bawdy wind that kisses all it meets is hushed within the hollow mine of earth and will not hear it. What committed impudent strumpet? So heaven stops the nose at it. Heaven doesn't want to smell the stink of this corruption. And the moon winks. The moon shuts its eyes. It doesn't even want to see what acts that Desdemona has committed. The bawdy wind, the wind itself with all its fluid uncontrollability, much like the water that he invokes at the opening of this dialogue and speech, that kisses all it meets, it's promiscuous, this wind, is hushed within the hollow mine of earth and will not hear it. Even this bawdy wind that kisses everything is quietened down within the hollow mine of earth and will not acknowledge this sinful behavior that Desdemona has committed. And he repeats it again, what committed? Impudent strumpet. That final criticism of her, simply dismissive and crass and rude. So there, here, this extended personification gives the elements a sense of vitality. It personifies the elements and reveals an all-encompassing sense of disgust at Desdemona's supposed transgressions. And it, I think, also reveals Othello's sense of fear and exposure in light of this, his concerns about the loss of reputation, because there's a sense of vulnerability if all the elements understand and know about your shames.